My name is Marc Hartz. I'm basically heading the product management for SAP Data Hub and SAP Data Intelligence. And within the next 1 hour, I will talk with you about what is actually the difference between Data Hub and Data Intelligence, because you should have realized that there are 2 product names now out there, and I will tell you exactly what is the difference and what are we going to do about it. Then I will jump into the 3 main categories we are having in the product, which is integrating and processing data in a landscape. It's about the governance and metadata management and the machine learning tooling and also deployment. And that is already, in a nutshell, in a spoiler alert, after the session, that's the 3 buzzwords you should remember, because that's exactly what the solution is all about. And you heard today and this morning already, Jürgen also covering more the machine learning aspects of it. And I would show you basically in each and every section. I do hope that we have enough time to jump here and there also in the system, and then we can also have a look directly in the system what the individual parts are basically all about. So a very short introduction about why do we have this product, or why do we have those products. The reason why we built that is basically the situation which is sketched here a little bit on that slide. It's that your landscape, that customer landscapes are getting more diverse, they're getting more complex. We do see a lot of stuff around distribution of data. There are now data lakes occurring, or not now, they are already there for a few years. And we got a lot of questions by customers, how do I integrate and how do I use this data which is now distributed across my landscape in a data lake, in a cloud store, in a BW system, in a HANA system. How do I integrate and how do I make use of that? And that's the reason why we invented and why we came up with SAP Data Hub, with the goal to bring basically that together, to have one platform, one solution where we combine basically, let's say, everything you need to manage this landscape. And that's first of all tackling the visibility part. So where is actually the data stored I need? What data do I have? In which quality do I have it and can I use it? Because a data lake, you might not know every bits and piece which is in there. So the first thing you have to do is getting a glimpse of, is there something useful in there which I maybe can use in an analytical application, or which I can join with my master data coming from a BW system, for example. The second thing is obviously bringing those assets together with, let's say, the emergence, what we saw a few years ago, for example, with IoT initiatives. We have seen those architectures basically accelerating, because I think nobody would argue that petabytes of IoT data might not fitting into a data warehouse, or at least not in a persistent way, but more in a logical way. You would not bring a petabyte of data into HANA. You would come up with something smarter to first work and aggregate with this data and then basically integrate it. With the emergence of the whole notions of machine learning and data science, it became now crucial, and I think we are now at a point where those initiatives also have to prove a value in the enterprise. We have seen that now for a few years, where data science and machine learning was a little playground next to an enterprise landscape. But now those guys also have to deliver, right? They have to deliver meaningful insights, meaningful assets. And that leads us to a question, if you have such a diverse landscape, how can you productively integrate and include the outcome of machine learning and data science in your regular business process, which is not that easy, as a spoiler already. But I will show you the idea we have in mind and how we can do that. So basically the 3 aspects we would like to tackle with this solution, of course, is on the one hand side, the governance part of it, visibility, where's the data stored, in which format can I use it? How do I integrate? How do I connect? Is it a streaming? Is it ETLing? Is it a mix of it? Because also there I can tell you IoT data and structured data behave completely different than unstructured data. So you have to get a powerful tool which is combining basically all of that. And then in the end, if we talk about a powerful processing, doing something meaningful with the data, you need also a scalable way how you can execute that. It's not done with, I have an ETL tool which has an application server. For machine learning, for example, you need to distribute workload. So you need to be agile, you need to be scaling, you need to address hybrid landscapes, cloud and on-premise, and different type of workload. So that is what we have seen for many years, and why we basically decided to come up with exactly the solution around SAP Data Hub, which now evolved into SAP Data Intelligence. And I can also explain you in a second why. But for now, please take both of them now as a synonym. So Data Hub is basically the foundation, and it's included in Data Intelligence. So everything I explain, and when I mix the two words, it's basically exactly about the same. Our goal with that was to build an end-to-end solution, and when I say end-to-end, I really mean end-to-end, and that's shown a little bit in this little process there on the bottom. So end-to-end means in our case from how do I connect to how do I make use of the data, and there are a lot of things and a lot of individual steps in between. It's not only about connecting, but then it's also about fetching the data, for example, transforming it. Make an example, there is data from an IoT sensor coming via a Kafka queue, stored in an Azure data lake, and afterwards it should be published in a BW system. There are a lot of steps in between, there are a lot of challenges in between, how you basically bring this data up to this consumption point. And what we wanted to do with the solution overall is to exactly address this end-to-end process. Meaning from this connectivity piece to discover also the landscape, browsing in the individual parts, and then fetching the data which is relevant, preparing means cleansing, transforming, processing it, building then scalable, and you will see the word pipelines later in the tooling, and that's nothing else than a modern and a distributed way of a data flow and the orchestration of that. And then creating machine learning models, creating and training them and applying them into production, and then have an end-to-end monitoring solution out of it. That sounds like Data Hub and Data Intelligence is doing everything, right? And it's partly also true. So that was exactly our goal. We wanted to do, let's say, a little bit of everything, because we believe that those disciplines need to be very close together and not fragmented. Because if you have that process in a fragmented way, and we have seen dozens of customers addressing that in a best of breed, which is also not wrong, you can of course also do that, but you will have many glitches, you will have many gaps in between. If the technologies are not fitting, if the stack is very complex. Within our own IT department, we had for such a comparable scenario from fetching messaging data in a messaging queue to a data lake, we have 15 technologies, like Scoop, like a lot of Python in between, like then a monitoring solution on top and so on. And that's of course complex. And if you have the manpower to manage that, it's cool, perfect, it's the right solution for you. If you don't have that, if many people are relying on that stack, you might need to think about in a more scalable way how you can do that, right? And that's exactly the reason why we brought up basically this solution. So you can envision it in a way that the solution itself sits basically in the middle, if you so will, of such a complex landscape. And that's exactly how we also built that picture here. So on your left-hand side, so you see a lot of enterprise sources. Of course, it's a SAP conference, so of course we call them SAP applications. So a lot of SAP applications from ERP systems to BW systems to HANA systems. And on the right-hand side, you do see what we call here the, let's say, the external world, where you have all of the messaging technologies, the cloud stores, whether it's a S3 bucket, whether it's an Azure Data Lake, whether it's a Google Cloud Store or whatever. You see APIs, you see third-party integration to databases, to other scheduling or governance applications, and you see a lot of, let's say, hubs where we have also, for example, a collection of APIs or microservices. And the task of Data Intelligence and Data Hub is now exactly to be the integration, to be the layer of bringing basically those together, in the different, let's say, aspects and domains I shared before. So you see the different buckets in there from pipelining to governance, which are exactly the key functionalities we will also zoom in basically later. Data pipelining and processing is exactly about connecting the dots, moving the data where necessary, and orchestrate the, let's say, pipelines and flows where it makes sense. So Data Hub is not necessarily about, let's say, building ETL or streaming jobs. It's about choosing the right path for the job to be done. And if the job to be done is orchestrating a few jobs, you can basically do that because we have orchestration and monitoring functionality where you can call a flow graph, a data services job, a Spark job, or whatever, and basically orchestrate that. And then, of course, have an end-to-end monitoring about that. Governance and metadata is about collecting from all of the sources the metadata. And the metadata means now the information about how is the structure looking like? So the columns, for example, what are the column names? What is the data type there? How's the column named? What is the quality of the data, if it's structured data, of course? Are there columns empty? How many unique records do I have there? So those type of things are stored in what we call a metadata catalog, which I will also share later. And now to really oversimplifying the difference between Data Hub and Data Intelligence, the three big boxes, that is actually what you know probably as SAP Data Hub, which we had an on-premise product exactly addressing pipelining, orchestration, and governance. What is now new on the table is the data science and the machine learning tooling. And that's this process which you see above there. So how we explore the data for a machine learning creation or for data science purposes, how we create a model with an inbuilt way how to do that. I will show that later. And if a model is being trained and ready, how can we apply that? And that is now exactly where data intelligence uses the foundation of Data Hub, takes the tooling and brings new on the table the tooling of this machine learning piece, which is in essence a Jupyter notebook and a machine learning scenario manager I will show later. And because our marketing guys thought it's a good idea, we gave it a new name and we called the combination out of it SAP Data Intelligence. And SAP Data Intelligence is in contrast to Data Hub a service. So Data Hub is an on-premise product which you can download from SAP and you can deploy it, for example, in any environment where we have Kubernetes. I come to that in a second. That means in public clouds or on bare metal on-premise. Data Intelligence is now taking this Data Hub as foundation, adding machine learning specifics, the scenario manager and Jupyter notebook, and offer that as a service, as a managed service with a consumption-based pricing and licensing out of SAP Cloud Platform. And you can now also assume that I'm, as a product manager, do not like to talk with you 10 minutes about the difference, and it's nearly the same thing. So yes, we are also working on aligning the name and the messaging to get rid also of this, let's say, explanation. But as it was an evolution, and I can also tell you how we got there, we have seen now with Data Hub nearly 150 projects we have done and customers we have in the meanwhile. We have seen that 70 or 80% of the projects we do have a machine learning context, a prediction, whatever, a TensorFlow training. Somewhere there is machine learning involved. So we made the decision to team up with our colleagues from the Machine Learning Foundation, which is a cloud service you might know, predefined and pre-trained machine learning services in cloud platform. And we said, hey, let's combine that because it makes sense. It's the right thing to do for customers, and customers are using it already in that way. And that is basically the story how Data Intelligence was born. That we said, okay, let's take Machine Learning Foundation, let's take Data Hub, offer it as a service, and then give it a new name. Okay, not my decision. But that's how we came there, and I truly believe it totally makes sense because in nearly all of the projects and customer discussions I have, those things are tightly aligned and tightly related to each other. Does that make sense? Data Hub, Data Intelligence. You will now later have to pass a test to get out there to explain the difference. I hope that makes somehow sense. I have to speed up a bit if I want to show all the demos. Oh yeah. But I definitely want to transport also how we are doing that, because that is when we talk truly about what is the innovation, why do we make such a big hype about the thing, it's also the way how we build that. which was very, very new for SAP. When I asked 2 years ago who knows Kubernetes, there were maybe Eric, maybe someone like you knew Kubernetes, but the vast majority of the audience didn't know it. This has changed, luckily, 2 years, which is, for me, crazy from a speed perspective, how we got there. But Data Hub was the first containerized solution also we shipped as SAP. Means all of the boxes you see here in the architecture are basically Docker container and images SAP is transporting, and you can download, of course. And then we are using Kubernetes as an orchestration technology to deploy that in a cluster environment, to get basically the scaling and the performance we need. That means this solution is completely open. And that's also maybe something notable on a SAP conference. So you can bring any open source, any third party, any machine learning model of choice, any library, any whatever you have. Everything which can be squeezed in a Docker container can run and can be managed with Data Intelligence / Data Hub. So is how we develop our software, and that's also how partner and customer can basically do it. It's basically built in a way, and you see the different layers that we have, and that's the first thing I will show in a second, that you have this pipelining layer, which is all about. So everything, and that was also shown this morning in the demo, I will show it in a second. That is actually everything we do, every process you kick off is basically executed in this pipeline, in this flow-based paradigm we have there, which can be extended with own operators, own images you can bring as a customer or partner, and of course what we are leveraging as well. Then you have the application layer where we have more the out-of-the-box integration capabilities also there. We are leveraging assets we have already in our portfolio. We are also owning an integration portfolio you might know, like data services, smart data integration, so all of these assets. And we take the connectivity there and we integrate it here as well, because we do not want to reinvent the wheel and we do not want to get rid of those solutions, but we are of course also embedding the assets we have there from a connectivity point on or transform point of view, of course also here and make it available. And then we have this data intelligence specific part, like I said, where we, and I will show that, have a scenario manager, a cockpit, which is specific for machine learning and data science parts, like versioning, training of models, for example. That's what you can do there. And an inbuilt Jupyter Lab that you can write and you can create own notebooks, which then, again, that's the whole story of this architecture, deploy in the end and are getting executed via this pipeline. One word on the deployment options. So also there we took quite a ride after a few iterations. Basically the solution, Data Hub and Data Intelligence are really flexible, and that's also due to this Kubernetes layer, of course, for deployment. So from start we were able to be deployed on-premise, which you see where we are certifying partner solutions, basically enterprise offerings, like Red Hat, like SUSE, like Cisco, where we have enterprise-grade Kubernetes software and components. In the cloud, we are betting on the, let's say, predefined and managed Kubernetes services, for example, like AKS, EKS, and Google service, where we have the managed Kubernetes services in the different public clouds, which is our runtime. There are private cloud offerings like VirtuStream, and of course with Data Intelligence there is now within our own SAP cloud platform, and you might have heard Gardener as a runtime, which was also on Jürgen's slide this morning. That is Kubernetes managed by SAP, and we are leveraging that. So that is exactly what is underneath basically Data Intelligence. That is our hosting and environment. And of course, then there are a lot of hardware partners which are now offering, especially for on-premise, predefined bundles. Like Lenovo has a bundle, HP has something where you have predefined appliances and configurations basically to go with that. Having said that, let's jump into the tooling and into the solution. And I would like to start, because that is exactly the, let's say, one big piece of the whole magic we are doing there, is the integration piece. And you might have seen these boxes in between. And that is where we have built specific buckets of connections and connectivity types with different services. And you see, for example, this ABAP integration there. Because we would like to connect to an ABAP system like a BW, like a S4HANA, like a C4HANA system in a way which is, of course, differentiating to any competitor. And when I say that, I mean especially the semantics which are in an ABAP system. An ABAP system has a lot of semantics. And I give you an easy example, a sales order. A sales order is in an ERP table, probably 6 tables or 8 tables, I don't know, which you have to join together. Line item header, this type of thing, the BW folks might remember. And what we would like to do there is to keep that semantics and know it. That when you later in, for example, in our catalog, search for show me all the sales orders, we do not show you the individual 5 tables, but we know there is an object called sales order, which consists of 5 tables. But you as a data scientist, you don't have to care that it's 5 tables, right? You just maybe want to get the outcome of these 5 tables, the join, the aggregate. And that's exactly the semantics and the idea we have behind that, where we can, of course, provide a better integration, more integration out of the box, keeping the semantics, then fetching and taking care of delta and uploads, for example, compared to different other solutions which are, of course, out there in the market. So I will jump through a few of those, let's say, connectivity types. I will highlight a few, especially the ABAP and the cloud integration, and then we jump in the system. A pipeline in general is basically, and that's now a very dummy hello world pipeline, but it's basically consisting out of those boxes which are called operators. So that are operations which are executed somewhere in the landscape. That could be in HANA, that could be in Spark, that could be training a TensorFlow model, or it could be, like in our example here, read from HDFS, so from a Hadoop lake, apply then a Python code where we do a join, or sentiment analysis, and then push the result into Vora. That was a very, very, very simple use case we have basically created. And with that concept, each of this box is basically in the end, now I'm oversimplifying, is in the end a Docker container. That means when you create such a pipeline, we are spinning and we are starting and stopping container images as we need to go. And that means if the Python analysis is more resource intensive, you could give it, for example, a scalability, you could give it an parallelism, and then we would spin up a lot of container basically and scale that in the underlying basically environment. Those little boxes, those operators can be extended, so you could write your own image, which is then represented and reusable. So all of that has a life cycle. It has versioning, it can be transported, but not in the SAP way, more like export-import type of thing, but it has a life cycle where you can manage basically all of that. And that is exactly what we would like also to achieve. So we are, for example, especially now with our current version, we are offering a huge set of basically connectivity options, and you see just a few highlighted there, and I will show also a few others there, from simple connectivity to file storages, to databases, like I said, where we also leverage certain connectivity types from data services to connect to Oracle, SQL Server, DB2, for example. Spark Hadoop services, we are able to call services within our cloud platform. So all of that is basically within this paradigm, and I will show it to you in a basically second. For those who know Data Hub, as I see also a few of our existing Data Hub customers here in the room, there are now also a delta of course, the latest Data Hub version, which is in specifically the integration to enterprise systems. So that was really the focus area where we invested within the last release a lot. And the current release is 2.7, which we are just shipping, where you will find the integration to basically ABAP-based systems, S4HANA, BW, older ERP systems, where we are also leveraging assets like the SLT replication server, for example, to connect basically to those systems. And what we can then what we do have then is, first of all, out of the box metadata connectivity. So like I said, the sales order thing, that we keep the semantics, that we can call ABAP-specific functionalities, like a function module, like a BAPI, like whatever is there, but also that we can start provisioning, that we can replicate data from an ERP system. that we can use the ODP framework in BW to fetch delta records from a BW. That is everything which is basically now new also in the release, where we have very, very, very specific functionality for those systems, because that was one part we wanted to invest a lot. Mentioning and highlighting exactly the BW part, there is a lot of predefined services, especially for BW systems. Why? Because that was the area where this whole idea also was born, and where we see a lot of customers demanding those services. And like I said, the latest and greatest we built there is a delta provisioning from a BW system for the different assets you have, from a query to an info provider, where we can fetch delta records and delta packages and can keep them. And also there, semantics means we can keep the query semantics, which is in a BW system mostly where the customer invested the most of the money, where the most logic is being kept. So we can connect and we can keep also the semantics there. Let me jump into the system. The little the gentleman there was forcing me to change the resolution. So it looks like a giant application now, so sorry for that. But what you basically see there is what we call the launchpad, where you have the different applications within, and you see that is now a data intelligence system. So that's a system running in cloud platform, where I show now all the parts, because like I said, everything is included there. Where you have now the different areas, for example, where you can manage and create connections in the landscape, which is then looking something like that, where you have the possibility to connect. And in my demo system, I do have now a few connections to some ABAP systems, a BW system, there is a C4 system, there are some HANA databases, there is Kafka, there is S3, there is Qualtrics, which was shown in the keynote, but you did not realize it because it was not mentioned there, but it was shown there. And you see a few predefined connectivities, and it's rather easy to create new ones. We have a user and credential handling attached to that. Once that is created, you can reuse that, and based on the created let's say connections, we can then offer, and we are offering then all of the other services which are shown here. So for example, I could now use those connections, and I jump right into, oh yeah, that's a strange resolution, okay. I jump right into our modeling environment here, which I mentioned before, where you see basically here a lot of the, let's say, predefined connectivity and predefined operators I shared before, from very technical things like connecting to messaging technologies, to HANA you saw there, submitting Spark jobs. You see a lot of inbuilt basically engines where you can do some programming. So basically we have from Java to Go to Python embedded programming and coding engines in there. Why? Because if everything which is provided out of the box is not enough, you can always then use, for example, a Python operator, use ODBC, JDBC, and connect to whatever, to something which is not offered out of the box. But the whole idea, of course, of this environment is to keep it as a low-code solution, right? Where you can code where necessary, but our goal is, of course, to provide as much as possible basically out of the box. And you see a lot of utilities from typical things which take a lot of time. If you have, and if you are dealing with sensor data, there is a lot of questions about the data format, CSV, PACI, OSE, the conversion between those different formats. So these are the things which are coming here as a different, let's say, service you could use. You see there are the services from the SAP application. We can push basically data to analytics cloud. So for example, and I think that's even an example where the visualization of what we built there is then pushed into a dashboard from Analytics Cloud, and that data intelligence is being used as a provisioning technology for exactly that. There's also a bit of fancy stuff in there. If I go a little bit down there, like I said, data intelligence also includes all of this machine learning specifics. So you see a few services there. You see OpenCV, you see pandas, you see a predefined services I will show in a second. And this is exactly, let's say, the environment, how you build basically everything of that. And what we have here is, let's say, a little bit more complex pipeline, which basically takes S3 data. So every operator, and you can see that, has here predefined configurations. You see now the different connections here we can connect to, where you see also the different, let's say, storages we are connecting. So that are basically all of the cloud storages and also HDFS. We take here S3 data basically from a C4 system, which was dumped in Amazon and AWS here. We do some conversion. We call an address cleansing service in the cloud. We put it in a table again, and we write the file back into S3. And I will have another lecture, which is called Enterprise Application Something Integration, where I show this example in a much more detail, where I show basically everything in detail. But now for me, it's I hope you get the idea, which is basically behind that. And like I said, now mapping it to the architecture, every icon speaks and represents a Docker container. While this is running either in a stream or in a batch mode, we are basically scheduling, starting and stopping containers, shutting them down and orchestrating it basically with Kubernetes. You can create, like I said, own operators. So everything here, of course, can be extended. So you could now write an own operator, which is representing, for example, a machine learning model or a different service you are basically calling. And for the, let's say, more developer of you, of course, there is also a way how you can just simply code it, of course. But like I said, the idea is that this is a low-code environment where you have this graphical interface and then basically can build that. So that is the core, and like I said, also the, let's say, the heart of a lot of stuff we are doing within Data Hub and Data Intelligence. Jumping to the metadata, let's say, section and area, there we had the vision that if you now have this pipelining tooling, what I just showed a second ago, if you build these pipelines, which are now touching many parts of the landscape, what's the first thing you have to do? And you have to know where the data is stored, right? You have to get visibility. You have to know where are the data assets. And that's exactly why we built and why we stepped into the area of cataloging, where we had the vision to say, okay, for every attached and every connected system, we can crawl the connected system and fetch the metadata from it. And that means we can crawl a BW system, we can crawl a HANA, we can crawl a S3 bucket, fetch the information of the attached files and objects and providers and tables or whatever the system is offering, put it in a catalog and provide services on top of that. And those services are now reaching from, let's say, quality services that you understand how is the underlying data quality, like I said, uniqueness, are the columns filled, is the type of the column the correct one, and so on. But there are also more business relevant services, which I think are nowadays for us all relevant, and that's exactly in the area of GDPR and data, let's say, governance, where you, for example, also have to understand how is the data flowing through a landscape. Because you maybe have, due to legal purposes, you have to visualize that, you have to audit that, right? And that is what we call a lineage and impact analysis, which is included there, which I will show basically in a second. This metadata part is constantly being, of course, extended. So we have right now, if you compare it to a solution like Information Steward or other solutions on the market, it's, let's say, a first step in this direction. We are integrating now also more and more functionalities from Information Steward. We are integrating with Information Steward, and we really want to get there to be this catalog, and I will highlight a few things what we added and what we brought within the last releases in a second. Within the last release, we had exactly two main features coming. The first is what we call data preparation. so that if you want to do, let's say, simple changes on files which are stored, let's say, again, S3 or ADL or wherever, we have a graphical interface, a graphical way how you basically can prepare that. And when I say prepare, I mean where you can cleanse it, where you have predefined mechanisms, for example, to trim a column, to anonymize a column, to join two data sets in a graphical environment. Without that, you have to build this pipeline yourself. It's embedded in the catalog itself that you, when you see a file, you can switch in this preparation window, you see the content, and you can switch it. And if the content is thousands of S3 CSV files, we take a pattern and we push let's say, the change and the transformation back to the source. So we create, if it's Hadoop, we would create a Spark job and say, please correct all of the files like that. And that is how it is built. If it's a HANA table, we would send a SQL statement to HANA, for example. If you want to create a new file, you could, of course, do that there. So the idea is to transform, shape, let's say, enrich the data in a very, very easy way without that you have to write code and without that you have to use an additional tool with it. I will show that also in a second. The part which I feel is most interesting for a lot of customers, exactly what I mentioned with the lineage functionality. Also there, we have a very early solution out there. We would like to extend this lineage basically to all of the sources we are supporting. Right now, it's a very limited set of sources as a first step. But the idea is to have such a visual lineage graph. And that could look like, again, example, remember my example, Kafka, Hadoop, BW, 3 systems, and you are now at the end of this chain in BW, and you would like to understand where's the data coming from originally. And what this lineage graph would then be able to show you would be on the very right-hand side, you would see your BW query, you would see your data store object, then you would see a source system, you would see a Hadoop file, and then you would see a Kafka queue. That is what this lineage graph would be about. So tracing back the data where it's originating and where it's actually coming from to exactly understand, is it trustworthy? Can I do something with it? Can I keep it? Can I push it in my BW system, yes or no? And like I said, we are right now supporting a few SAP sources. Goal with the next 2 releases is basically to have that for all of the SAP sources and all of the sources we are supporting with Data Hub available. Let me show you the Metadata Explorer. Jumping back in here, also that was shown in the keynote very, very briefly this morning. Again, sorry for the resolution. There you have a few areas now. You have this cataloging functionality where you, for example, could now browse the different connections I showed you before in the connection management. So I could browse that now. That would mean I could now drill into my BW system. I would see now my different info providers, my different queries, and I could select and I could have a look how is the data basically looking like. Or I could, let me see, I go to Hadoop. I see if I can find some file in there. For example, that are now the files from our great hands-on sessions, to mention that as well. And I could have, for example, here, have a look how this file is looking like, and I could start analyzing it and getting a first glimpse of basically how is it looking like, how is the value distribution, what records are in there. So that's what we call a profile. And based on such a profile, you could also create alerting. So for example, if new files are being created, are they still sticking to, let's say, this quality idea you have? For example, that a column should not be empty, right? That is one of the latest parts we basically created, where we put in here data quality rules, where you have a predefined set of rules you can basically create. And I have here now a very, 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 very simple rule. So for example, check the country column in somewhere and check if the, let's say, if the country is fitting to an abbreviation, for example, for US. And if you apply now this rule to Hadoop, to S3, to whatever, a BW query, you would get a quality profile, and you would get, let's say, And that's something we want to extend in the next release, where we would like to show you here also a quality and a KPI dashboard, where you also get some information, how many records are now fitting to that. This rule is now just being created by me for some demo purposes. When you apply that, you would also see, for example, how many percent or how much percentage of the underlying data records is fitting to the overall, let's say, rules and applying basically to that. Stepping back to the beginning, I mean, the main purpose of such a catalog is, of course, to search in it. So if I now search, for example, for a customer, I do get a result basically in which connected systems do you have some sort of customer information. And you see there, the first thing is some service alignment collection, whatever that is, which has a column which is called customer. That comes from a C4C, so from a C4HANA system, and it's connected via OData. So that's now just the technical information, where is it coming from. And based on everything I find here now, I could drill in, I could browse, I could quality profile, I could apply rules to that, right? Or later, if you combine this now to the pipelining I showed before, you could choose in the pipeline, instead of having here, for example, S3, you could, for example, reuse the connectivity. You could you could basically reuse here the connection from this connectivity and from the Explorer you have seen, and said, if you found data which is reliable, which is cleansed, and it's S3, I save this asset and I make it available, so that in the pipeline modeling, I could reuse that, and later in the machine learning and data science environment as well, right? So that is also how basically those bits and those pieces are basically created. I could also here now prepare the data. I could add it to the catalog. I could basically, and I have all of the services basically attached to that. Jumping back to, so now we talked about the pipelining, we talked about the governance, right? I skipped a little bit the schedule and orchestrating due to time purposes. And now I would like to focus on the, let's say, specific part also for data intelligence, which we added, which is exactly the scenario management, where if you now, what you learned now within the last 40 minutes, if you combine all of that together, we have now the possibility to search for the data. We have the possibility to connect to a source. We showed, or we went into the pipelining, we went into the data preparation, so how you easily can transform the data. And now we come to the point which was also not so well integrated for the Data Hub folks in the audience, in the Data Hub before, because there we saw in many customer projects that customers were using external Jupyter environments or external notebook environments, created something, then copy and pasted the code and pasted it into Data Hub and executed pipelines. And that was, of course, not the user experience we wanted to have. So we decided the customers can still do that, of course, but we want also to, let's say, offer something out of the box, right? Having an inbuilt way which has the complete life cycle and a complete integration into all of these assets, from pipelining to governance, in basically the tooling, so that, let's say, we can really have a whole process from a data science perspective, from identifying the right sources, pre-processing it, and creating then the model. And also once the model is created and you have found the right, let's say, data, you have trained the right model in the right version, that you then also can deploy it into production and use the mechanisms I showed you before to schedule and to also monitor it, to constantly see, is it performing and how is it performing, right? And that's exactly, let's say, the part we basically built completely new, where we basically built this, what we call a scenario manager. And the scenario is for us now basically the combination out of data, the right, let's say, machine learning algorithm or model you would like to apply, and the versioning of that, right? And what you see here is basically that this is a wrapper where you can bundle those basically assets into what we call a machine learning scenario. And that is now a very, very dummy one, where you see I can use data sets, which is basically now the source data, if you so will, I would like to apply. You see the notebooks, which are now within this scenario, and you see the pipelines which are attached to that, which are then executing and deploying basically that into production. And speaking of the notebooks, let's just open one. You see that is the inbuilt basically Jupyter Lab environment, which is now a complete standalone Jupyter notebook where you can do whatever. You can add additional libraries, you can call external services, you could use it just as a standalone, let's say, Jupyter notebook, with the difference that what you build in there will be translated and will be used basically in the end in the basically in the pipeline environment, and will be attached and integrated in the life cycle of, let's say, the underlying foundation, right? So that is now also, again, to make some marketing from for the hands-on session. So I just use now the hands-on session, which I think one of those gentlemen there in the back will give. So please feel free also to visit that. There is a lot of great content. There is a lot of great assets where you can basically touch all of that, even a complete session. Just speaking of this Jupyter notebooks, which is definitely worth to have a look. But it's not only the Jupyter environment. It's also, and that's what I mentioned before, that we integrated basically all of the, let's say, the services we had and inherited from the machine learning foundation, which was, again, the, let's say, predefined or offered machine learning services as so-called also templates in Cloud Platform. And that is exactly what you see here. So we do have now basically the possibility to choose exactly this predefined services, which we are then offering out of the box by generating also then, again, this into this pipeline environment. So meaning if you want to implement an OCR, for example, then we would generate basically the underlying data pipeline for execution, and you would not have to build that by your own. You would just give it, let's say, that's the source where you find your images. That's what I would like to do, and we would generate the pipeline, if it's loading, to basically then execute and also deploy that, right? Why ever this is now not loading. But with the whole idea that everything you do, you can also then in the end, like I said, monitor and basically trace, right? So that you can have a glimpse on how are the things basically performing. And that's now true for everything which is basically, which was basically shown, whether it's an integration pipeline, whether it's a pure machine learning pipeline. So everything shares basically the same, let's say, framework and the same concept there, that you can basically drill into that and see how are the individual parts basically performing, what has been happening, or also to find an error. So if something is, let's say, aborting, where was an error? Was it in Spark? Was it in HANA? Was it in BW? Or was it in Data Hub, which is, of course, never happens. Data Hub is always performing. So you can have a glimpse basically there how is the system behaving and what's basically going on. Also speaking, a short outlook, and there is, of course, also further dedicated roadmap sessions where I will drill into a lot of these details I mentioned before. Like I said, we are also working on aligning basically Data Hub and Data Intelligence more to a common solution. This is now let's say, the pure Data Intelligence roadmap, where we will basically extend especially the features in there much more. A lot of topics which are basically on there is again on the integration side, but then also on the machine learning side. So for example, there, a very hot topic at the moment is the whole notion around AutoML. So selecting the right model for the available data, for example, making suggestions. What is now let's say, the algorithm, the model you can apply, which would make sense based on the given source data. So that is something we are implementing there. All of these services I showed before will be extended. So actually our plan is really to move the machine learning services and the foundation completely to Data Intelligence. versioning of data, so that you do not only have the versioning of the machine learning model itself, but also to the attached data, because usually in a data science project that is iteration. So you change the model, you change maybe the parameters, you create a new feature, and you do that in an iterative way many times. And all of that pieces and assets should be versioned in this basically wrapper I showed you before. We will further integrate the distributor environment I showed you before, much more deeper in the existing tooling. And then there are the 3 other buckets, like governance, where we will come up with a way how we can also upload files, which was still a gap we heard from many customers, into the solution, where we enhance the rules also to more meaningful business rules. So right now it's a set of technical rules. Is a column empty? Is a data record complete? How's the accuracy? That is what is there right now. But of course it would be nice to have also some meaningful business rules, like relations between business objects and stuff like that. That is exactly what will be next in basically that space. In the pipelining, we are investing heavily in templates. And templates means if you have a scenario load from ERP to an Azure data lake, then I would like to offer you a predefined template where you just have, I'm oversimplifying, to do 2 clicks, and then it will be generating a pipeline which fetches your ERP data, moves it into Azure, for example. Or vice versa, of course. So we are investing heavily that it remains also a low-code environment with a lot of things out of the box, instead of going through coding or development iterations. I mentioned already the integration with BW systems, which is not only true for BW for HANA, but also for older BW releases, where we are investing in writing into BW, but then also fetching delta records from BW. And when I say BW, I have to extend that also a little bit. As you heard and as you saw here at TechEd probably, or you will see, there is also data warehousing cloud around. And you can also imagine that with the solution we are having here now, an integration solution, processing, that this is also interesting for data warehousing cloud, where we will also come up with the integration between data intelligence and data hub to data warehousing cloud, that you can do more and complex transformation and processes basically before the data reaches data warehouse cloud or a BW system. That's exactly what this thing here is built for, and that's exactly the way which we are going. And I just remind myself that I should put it also on the roadmap. Deployment and connectivity I showed you the existing connectivity options already. Data intelligence is right now being offered as a service on AWS, so cloud platform AWS. So what we are doing there is we are extending that on more regions. So we would like to have global coverage until end of the year for Asia, for US East, US West, and of Europe is already there. But we would also like to have a first beta program started on Azure until end of the year. There we are still unsure if we do Europe or North America. We still have to decide there. And there will be a first offering, maybe not so interesting for here, on Ali Cloud later this year. And the last point I would like to highlight there is what we call the management of APIs. So what we see nowadays, of course, a lot of microservice-oriented architectures. There are a lot of API endpoints around. So what we would like to offer is also a management of those APIs within the solution, where you can, for example, enable that the endpoint of such a pipeline, of such a process, or a whole machine learning model, so a created model itself, generates an API which can then be consumed and embedded into other basically applications. That is basically what will be wrapped in there. And then looking, let's say, a little further ahead, of course, we will extend that. Automation is a big topic, applying machine learning and this whole intelligence to the tooling itself. For example, if we have this metadata knowledge, that we then also can derive meaningful, let's say, actions that we, for example, we realize if you always cleanse the data in a certain way, we make you a suggestion, hey, do it again. Or if we realize a timestamp is not a timestamp, then we could generate that already and ask you, hey, do you want to change that, right? So applying basically that to ourselves. And you might have also realized this morning that Jürgen was talking a lot about how we build intelligent applications and so on. And we, of course, will be, and we are already a big part in that. So a lot of the business applications, a lot of this intelligence business applications will use under the hood, basically this technology to be offered and to also scale and gain of the, let's say, the advantages I basically shared before. A few more examples in the roadmap, of course. Thank you so much for attending. I will be further around. There are also a few colleagues of mine which for sure will join me for questions. And thank you so much.